Joining us now for reaction is Jeff Bell, the president of the Broward County Sheriff's Deputies Association, as well as Mark Fuhrman, who is a former LAPD detective and a Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, it's good to see you. Mark, let's start with you. It was chilling to watch the surveillance video and also to listen both to the students' 911 calls and to the old 911 calls that Cruz himself made and that Cruz's caretaker at the time had made. Your reaction to the new developments?
Well, when I watched the video, Laura, the thing that really strikes me is watching Peterson look at the building, not look at the area outside of the building. He knew the shots were coming from the building. He stood there and he listened for 4 to 5 minutes as probably as many as 17, 18, 20 people were shot inside, and he did nothing. So I watch him in that video. I don't think he was mentally or physically prepared for the job. I don't think he probably ever was. He lost his nerve if he ever had any. He lost it, and there's really no excuse for it, except for, I think one thing is there was probably a lack of training and leadership on that sheriff's department, coming right down from Sheriff Israel right down to Scott Peterson.
Jeff, you have spoken about this before, the utter lack of time and focus on training for the exact type of situation that Mark was analyzing there. And an active shooter, it has to be muscle memory. You just know what to do, and you have to train for repeatedly and often to be able to respond in the right way. I mean, most people do. So what do you know about the training at Broward? We know what the manual says, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but what actually took place?
Well, Laura, I would think that in Broward County, I could sum this up as the best with the law enforcement community. We viewed this as the perfect storm coming. And unfortunately, 17 people lost their lives in Parkland that day for a series of events that we consider to be bad policy, the wrong priorities in training, the politicizing of our police forces down here, and the bad implementation of deals that we've made with the school board with the Promise program and civil citation. And what I mean by training, when I go back to that, is that our trainers do a wonderful job with the limited resources that they have with the Broward Sheriff's Office. But what we need to do is focus the resources that we have on better tactics and better training. For example, we spend in in-service training 8 hours, mandatory in-service training in de-escalation tactics, and then we spend another 8 hours in politeness and policing tactics to be nicer to people that we're arresting. But when it comes time to practicing on the gun range and practicing scenarios, we dedicate 4 hours of training on the gun range where we may squeeze off about 150 rounds and then 2 hours of practice with simulation on that. The wrong emphasis is being put on politicizing the police department and not training properly for these scenarios. It is out of control, and we have to stop this.
Okay, the politeness training, I think maybe I need some politeness training here because I'm being tough on Scott Israel. But here's the Broward County Sheriff's Office training manual. Okay, here's one full screen. The first officer or 2 officers on scene will immediately go to confront the shooter. Military tactics work well in this situation. Also, another part of it, remember, every time you hear a gunshot in an active shooter incident, you have to believe that another victim is being killed. Mark, you know this well with all your experience in LAPD. Something isn't adding up here. We're getting reports, and we're still doing actual investigation on this, reports from retired officers, Mark, who say that because of the way the patronage system that Scott Israel has an effect there, we got a lot of people in place with inadequate experience to do the jobs they're supposed to be doing. Inadequate experience, but they got a connection because a friend of a friend gave a donation to his campaign, and it doesn't look good. On the surface, it doesn't look good. Your reaction?
Well, this is the problem when you have a politicized law enforcement agency, when you have an elected official calling the shots that quite possibly is a competent police officer, or he could just be a civilian that becomes sheriff. But when you start using nepotism to fill your ranks, or favors, or paying somebody back for their contributions or their support during a campaign, it's the kiss of death. This is a leadership problem. And as far as what Jeff was saying about training, level one of those beautiful golf courses down in Florida and make a range for the officers, a county-wide, a state range. This this is where the rubber meets the road. And as far as suspects and being nice, when they say you're under arrest, it's up to the suspect to determine what happens after that. If they want to play hard, then you play harder. That class just lasted 30 seconds. It's over. You need to focus all your attention on the threat and the deadly threat, not only to the officer, but to civilians and citizens that are completely unknowing of the threat in front of them. Officers know it, and they should train for it, and they should train for specific incidents, just like Parkland.
Jeff, I have to ask you about these calls that a lot of people haven't really focused on, but that late November call to 911. You had Nicholas Cruz himself call, saying, oh, I was kicked out of the house I'm staying in. I got into a fight with someone. I was punching a wall. And then Ms. Deschamps, who actually had taken in Nicholas Cruz, whose son got into the fight with him. She says on that 911 call that we just played, he has held a gun to his brother's head before and to his dead mother's head who had just recently died. So this was nothing new for him to threaten someone by holding a gun to his head. At that point, and you both can address this, how does the police not act on that, knowing that she says he's going to get a gun at Dick's Sporting Goods, and she's basically said, I'm very worried about that. And then she doesn't decide to press charges afterward because she felt bad for him or whatever. But couldn't the police have acted right at that moment?
Well, Laura, down here in Broward County, with the law enforcement officers, all of that was removed out of our hands with the civil citation program and the promise program, whether it's on the school or out on the street. For these misdemeanor crimes, we don't have the ability to arrest these juveniles and bring them down to the juvenile hall under arrest charges on that.
He's 19 years old there.
Our hands are tied.
Not a juvenile,
correct.
19
now
years
he's 19.
old.
Correct, he is 19 now, but we've created this sense of empowerment to allow Mr. Cruz and other people like this to get to this point where nothing has happened in their life, and now we've created this problem.
Right, I get that, but Mark, my point is, at that point, when his guardian essentially says he's pointing a gun at my son, and then his mother, and then his brother, and he's going to get a weapon, could the police at that point have done something, and should they have?
Yes, they could have, and it's a felony. It's assault with a deadly weapon.
It's not a misdemeanor.
Or it's brandishing a fire. Well, it's not a misdemeanor. I mean, brandishing a firearm is a misdemeanor, but when you couple it with a threat, a visible or a verbal threat, then it's assault with a deadly weapon. You have a victim. It's an arrestable offense, and at the very least, you get the weapons out of the house. You arrest the juvenile. You get him into the system. You get him in front of a detective, a social worker. You get him into a juvenile hall, and if he's an adult, you get him into jail and have a detective talk to him. You do what you can. You get all the guns, everything that he has then, and you take it.
I mean, there's so many things that were red flags here, flares, fireworks. The fact that none of them added up to an intervention that stopped this is really stunning. And none of this was discussed at the rallies yesterday. It was all Donald Trump's bad and get the guns. I mean, that's all we were talking about. We weren't talking about any of this, and I know the other line is convenient. Great segment, guys. Thank you so much.
Laura,
and up next.
Could I
yeah,
add
go
something?
ahead. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just want to say, they're always looking for an excuse not to do something in certain instances. It's a female, it's a mental patient, it's a drug addict, it's a child. They're looking for a reason not to do something, because it's difficult, complicated, and time-consuming. And
they might get sued, right? Or they might get disciplined, or they might not get supported by the sheriff. That's another thing that they're worried about. Everyone's worried about getting sued and having their lives turned upside down. And so the police some of them are damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. It's a terrible situation.